It was the kind of late afternoon that felt almost fragile. Not just because the air was still and golden or because the leaves barely rustled like they were afraid to speak, but because my mind, for once, wasn't racing ahead to Monday's agenda. Tomorrow I was scheduled to testify before Congress. Yeah, that Congress. House Subcommittee on Child Welfare and Public Safety. But that wasn't what was on my mind. Not yet, because I'd promised my son Caleb, 8 years old, full of questions, full of life, that today was ours, just me and him. No meetings, no briefings, no guarded phone calls I had to step away for, just 1 hour at the park before dinner. That was the deal, and I keep my promises. We pulled into the lot, and Caleb practically exploded out of the car, racing toward the jungle gym like it was the last rocket ship off Earth. I smiled, took a breath, and followed behind at dad pace, coffee in hand, badge nowhere in sight. To everyone else, I was just another hoodie-wearing father with scuffed-up sneakers and a slightly tired look behind his sunglasses. And that's exactly how I wanted it. No authority, no title. Just dad. I found an open bench with a clear view of the swings. Caleb had a thing for swings. Said they made him feel like he could almost fly. And today he looked free. Like a kid should look. Like nothing in the world could touch him. But the thing is, that peace, that fragile stillness I mentioned, it doesn't last. Not always. Not when people like her exist. You ever have one of those moments where everything seems perfect until one wrong person walks into the frame? Yeah, that moment was coming, and what happened next? Let's just say she picked the wrong child to lay her hands on and the wrong parent to cross. If you've ever had to protect someone you love or stood up when no one else would, stick around. This story's for you. And if you're new here, take a second to hit that like button, drop a comment, or subscribe. We've got a lot more true stories and justice-fueled moments like this one. Now, back to the park. There's this thing that happens right before something goes terribly wrong. It's not loud. It's not dramatic. It's a pause. Like the universe holds its breath for half a second. That's exactly what I felt the moment she walked into the park. I didn't know her name then. Didn't need to. The haircut said everything. Bleached, stiff, a little too proud of 2006, the sunglasses oversized and unnecessary, especially with the sun hiding behind clouds. And the voice? Loud, sharp, the kind that cuts through playground chatter like a siren from a sinking ship. At first she was just noise in the background, complaining to another mom, something about line cutting on the slide, accusing a 6-year-old of being aggressive. You know, classic Karen behavior. I glanced over but didn't engage. Not yet. I was still sipping coffee, still hoping this would stay a normal afternoon. Caleb had made his way to the swings. He waited patiently, hands in his hoodie pockets, head down, kicking at the wood chips like he was drawing invisible circles. When the swing opened up, he gave me that little look, that one-of-a-kind grin like, "Watch me fly, Dad." And fly he did. I smiled, raised my coffee in a mock toast, and leaned back on the bench. And that's when I heard the scream. I told you that swing was ours. It came from her. I looked up to see her son, maybe a year younger than Caleb, standing stiff, arms crossed, pointing at the swing like it had his name on it. Caleb, still midair, slowed himself down and said, "You can go next, I just got on." Polite, calm, the way I'd raised him. But Karen wasn't having it. Her heels crunched across the gravel like she was on a mission from hell. She marched right past me, ignored me entirely, and went straight for my son. "This is our swing," she barked, jabbing a finger toward him. He saw us coming. He ran to it on purpose. I slowly, instinctively. I didn't want to make a scene, but I also knew something was about to happen. Caleb looked at her, confused and a little scared. I didn't. I was just waiting my turn. Then it happened. She raised her hand and shoved him off the swing. Hard. His little body hit the ground like a sack of laundry, elbow first, chin next. There was a second of stillness, the kind that's not peaceful but charged. Then Caleb cried out. I dropped my coffee, sprinting, not thinking, just reacting. By the time I got to him, his face was twisted in pain and his elbow was scraped open. The skin was raw and bleeding, but it was the look in his eyes that broke something in me. Shock, betrayal, humiliation. He whispered, "She pushed me." I turned to her. She stood there like she was proud of it. Maybe if your kid had some manners, he wouldn't get knocked down, she snapped. My fists clenched, not because I wanted to hit her, but because I wanted so badly not to. I looked around. Other parents were frozen, phones in hands, mouths slightly open. No one moved. Not yet. You think you can put your hands on someone else's child because you didn't get your turn? I said, voice low but steady. She scoffed. I barely touched him. He was being difficult. My son had that swing first. I don't remember taking out my phone, but I must have. I was already calling 911, explaining the situation calmly to dispatch, even as Caleb clung to my side. She started backing up then, slowly, like it was dawning on her that she may have crossed a line she couldn't uncross. I didn't mean to hurt him, she yelled. Why are you making this a big deal? He's fine. He's not fine, I said, and neither are you, and turned to leave. But two parents stepped in, a mom holding a stroller and a man in gym clothes. You're not going anywhere, the woman said, her voice trembling with adrenaline. We've got this on video. Karen looked around. The phones were out. The eyes were locked on her. The swing she fought for? Still swinging, but empty. And that's when I realized this wasn't just about my son anymore. This was about every other parent who had stayed silent while people like her poisoned spaces meant for joy. That's when I reached into my jacket, not for a badge, for my congressional hearing pass. I held it up and said loud enough for everyone to hear. Tomorrow morning, I'm testifying before Congress on child protection in public spaces. Guess what story I'll be starting with? Her face went pale. Her son, still watching, looked down in shame, and all I could think was, you picked the wrong swing and the wrong father. If this story has you fired up, don't forget to hit that like button, leave a comment, and subscribe. The next part, it's not just justice, it's transformation. Stay tuned, transformation story, stay tuned. You'd think getting caught red-handed, shoving an 8-year-old kid off a swing in front of a half-dozen parents with cameras rolling would make someone stop, reflect, apologize, back down. Not her. Karen didn't flinch. She stood there, arms folded, jaw clenched like she was the victim in all this. You people are insane, she snapped, glaring at the woman holding a stroller who had just blocked her escape route. This is what parenting looks like now? Just let kids do whatever they want? No discipline? No boundaries? I blinked in disbelief. You think pushing a child to the ground is discipline? I said. You think that makes you a good parent? She pointed at Caleb, who was still sitting on the bench, holding a napkin to his bleeding elbow, looking smaller than I'd ever seen him. He was being selfish, she barked. He knew my son was next, but he just sat there, ignoring us. That's disrespect. And you, she turned to me, voice dripping with contempt, you should be teaching him better, instead of jumping to call the cops the moment your precious snowflake gets a little bump. I stared at her, stunned. This woman had just physically assaulted my son, in public, in front of witnesses, and here she was doubling down like she was being persecuted. There was a low murmur spreading across the park now. You could feel the shift. Parents pulling their children closer, people shaking their heads. But Karen didn't notice. Or worse, she didn't care. He'll get over it, she said, tossing her hair like we were talking about a scraped knee in a soccer game. Maybe next time he'll learn not to cut in line. I took a step closer. Not threatening, not aggressive, but I needed her to see my eyes. I needed her to understand who she was talking to. You didn't just push a kid, I said quietly. You broke something you can't fix with a shrug. You humiliated a child. You made him question whether kindness and patience are worth it, and you did it without blinking. She scoffed again. You're blowing this out of proportion, another parent spoke up, softly but firmly. No, you crossed a line, she said. And it's not the first time. Karen turned, eyes narrowing. Excuse me? I've seen you here before, the woman continued, rocking her stroller gently. Last month you screamed at a 6-year-old for touching the monkey bars before your son. 2 weeks ago, you threatened to report a teenager for playing music from his phone. She threatened to sue me, a man added from behind. Because her son tripped over his own shoelaces and she blamed my kid for distracting him. Karen spun around like she was surrounded. Because she was. Phones were still recording, eyewitnesses were multiplying, and her fortress of entitlement was cracking. But even then, no apology, no remorse, just more denial. "This is harassment," she hissed. "You're all ganging up on me. You're trying to ruin my life over one little push." I shook my head. "You ruined it the second you decided your child's feelings mattered more than someone else's physical safety." And then she made a mistake, a big one. She turned to her own son, who had been silent this whole time, watching everything unfold. "You saw what happened," she said to him, loud and desperate. "Tell them." He cut in line. "He stole your swing." But the boy didn't speak, didn't even look at her. He just stared at the ground and slowly shook his head. That was the moment. The air shifted again. Even she felt it. A parent's last defense. Their own child had silently said, "No, Mom, you went too far," and she had. If you've ever seen someone double down instead of fessing up, drop a comment and tell us how it ended. And if you're new here, hit that subscribe button. You don't want to miss what happens next, because next comes part 4, when the law gets involved and the real reckoning begins. There's a moment, right before the tide turns, where time slows, where everyone stops talking and waits. That moment was now. Karen stood frozen, her son's silent shake of the head echoing louder than any shout could. Her voice had been loud, her confidence louder. But now, the silence around her was deafening, and still, she had no idea who she was dealing with. I looked down at Caleb, his small hand still gripping the napkin over his bleeding elbow, his face trying to stay strong, but his eyes brimming with confusion, hurt, and something worse, self-doubt. And something inside me shifted. This wasn't just about a slap or a swing or a bruised elbow. It was about what that slap stood for. The entitlement, the abuse of power, the blind belief that some people can get away with anything because they always have. Not today. I stood up slowly and reached into my back pocket. Not for a weapon, not for my badge, but for something Karen never saw coming. My federal credentials and a congressional guest badge, the one I would be wearing the next morning inside the Capitol building. The golden seal of the U.S. Department of Justice caught the sunlight just enough to silence whatever pity party Karen was about to throw for herself. I raised my voice, not to shout, but to project. "My name is David Cross. I'm a senior legal advisor for the Department of Justice. Tomorrow, I testify before Congress on national standards for child protection in public spaces." I paused. Let it land. "And you just made yourself the perfect case study." Gasps, whispers, phone still recording. Karen's face collapsed. "That's not real," she muttered. "You're bluffing. This isn't Washington. This is just a park." I stepped closer. "This isn't just a park," I said. "This is where kids are supposed to feel safe. Where parents are supposed to breathe for 5 minutes without worrying someone like you is going to turn a plowground into a war zone." Her eyes darted, searching for a way out. I kept going. "You shoved my son in public. You showed no remorse. You justified it with lies. And now, you're standing in the middle of a crowd of witnesses, on multiple camera angles, with half this community ready to sign statements." Karen backed up a step. "You're threatening me." "No," I said. "I'm protecting my son and every other kid you've terrorized." That's when the first police car pulled up, then a second. It wasn't loud. No sirens, no flashing lights. Just 2 patrol officers stepping out with calm professionalism, scanning the scene, already aware because I'd called them 10 minutes earlier when Karen was mid-rant. I walked up to the officer in charge, handed him my ID and gave him a rundown, clear, concise, factual, just like I was trained to do. The officers turned to Karen. "Ma'am, we've received a report of physical assault against a minor," the taller officer said. "We've also got multiple eyewitnesses and video footage." Karen looked like a kid caught with her hand in the cookie jar, except instead of crumbs, she had a public playground, a crowd, and her own son quietly shaking his head behind her. "I didn't mean to," she shouted. "It was just a reaction. That kid he was rude." The shorter officer nodded calmly. "That'll be in your statement. For now, we're going to need you to come with us." The handcuffs clicked. Her jaw dropped. "You're ruining my life over a swing, over one mistake. You can't do this." I turned back toward her. Calm, final. "No, you did this. and it's not a mistake if you keep doing it. As the officers led her toward the cruiser, a few parents applauded softly, not mockingly, not for show, but because, for once, someone had finally stood up to her, and I wasn't done. If you've ever witnessed injustice in broad daylight and wished someone would finally do something about it, hit that like button, leave a comment, and subscribe, because what comes next? The courtroom, the community, and the kind of justice that echoes far beyond a swing set. I used to think the hardest part of being a parent was protecting your child from what the world throws at them. Turns out, it's harder to teach them how to stand tall afterward. To show them that even when people do the worst to you, you still have the power to rise. By the time Karen was escorted off the playground, the energy had shifted. The fear was gone. In its place, something else. Fire, solidarity, truth. Parents started talking, really talking for the first time. Not just about what happened today, but about what they'd been putting up with for months, years even. She yelled at my daughter for laughing too loud. She threatened to sue me because my son sneezed near her kid. She called my husband a pervert for helping a lost child find his mom. Each story poured out like a dam had broken. And the shocking part, everyone thought they were the only ones. We had all been suffering alone, in silence, afraid that speaking up would make things worse. But now, Karen was in handcuffs. And the silence was gone. One mom, tearful, told me she stopped taking her kids to the park on weekends. She made us feel unsafe, like we were always on trial, she said. But today you made her answer for it. That hit me harder than I expected, because I hadn't just stood up for my son. I had unknowingly stood up for a neighborhood. And it wasn't over yet. The videos went viral, first on a local parenting group's Facebook page, then Reddit, then TikTok. Within hours, I was fielding calls from local news reporters, city council aides, even a producer from a national morning show. I declined the TV spots. This wasn't about attention, but I did say yes to one thing. Testifying the next morning, the congressional hearing I'd been preparing for. It was originally meant to cover policy frameworks for child safety in public spaces. Cold, bureaucratic, easy to ignore. But now I had a story, a real one they couldn't look away from. I stood before that committee in D.C. the very next day wearing the same suit I'd worn to the park, coffee stains still faint on the cuff. The senators asked their questions like they always did, formal, distant. But when it was my turn, I didn't read from the prepared remarks. I told them about Caleb. About the swing, the slap, the woman who thought she could do anything and get away with it. And the moment she realized for the first time she couldn't, I told them about the other parents, the hidden stories, the invisible damage caused when communities are too afraid to speak or too exhausted to fight. I showed them the videos. I watched a senator from Arizona grip the arm of his chair as Karen's voice played over the speakers, snarling at a crying child. I watched another from Oregon wipe her glasses. And then I said, if justice doesn't exist at a playground, where does it exist? You could hear a pin drop. Back home, the impact was immediate. The Parks Department fast-tracked new security measures. Cameras, clear signage about conduct, designated parent liaisons. But more than that, the culture changed. Parents were no longer afraid to speak up. They showed up, in shifts, to volunteer during busy hours. They formed a community board to oversee public safety feedback. They even started a program where older kids mentored younger ones, helping them feel confident and safe in shared spaces. And Caleb, he healed, not just his elbow, his spirit. The first time we returned to that same swing set, I expected hesitation. Instead, he ran ahead, pumped his legs hard, and shouted, "Dad, watch me go higher than before." And just like that, I knew. We didn't just win. We changed something. If you've ever seen a community rise up after years of silence, drop a comment below. Hit that like button if you believe that justice starts with standing up, even when your voice shakes. And don't forget to subscribe for more stories that prove one moment can change everything. Up next, Part 6, The Courtroom Reckoning. Because Karen's story wasn't over yet, and neither was ours. I never thought a swing set would bring me to Capitol Hill. But here I was, walking through those marble corridors, past portraits of lawmakers, flags standing tall like sentinels of justice, and every step echoed the slap that still rang in my memory. This wasn't the original plan. I'd prepared a 20-minute brief on public safety infrastructure in urban recreational zones. Dry, sterile, bureaucratic. But now I was here, with something more powerful than a policy memo, a story. I wasn't just a federal agent, I wasn't just a father, I had become a witness to what happens when entitlement goes unchecked and what it really takes to protect a child. The morning of the hearing, my phone buzzed constantly. Press inquiries, messages from parents, screenshots of trending Reddit threads. One headline stuck with me. "She slapped the wrong kid and woke up the system." There was no turning back now. The chamber was cold, not physically, no, they had the temperature cranked up like always, but cold, in that quiet, polished, political kind of way. Until I started speaking. "I came here today not just as a federal official," I said, steadying my breath, "but as a father who watched his son cry on a public playground because an adult felt entitled to punish a child who didn't respect her space." You could feel it. Senators who were checking their phones looked up. Staffers stopped typing. The room leaned in. This wasn't just one bad apple, I continued. This was a pattern. And the worst part, no one spoke up until it was caught on camera, because we've built public spaces where bad behavior is easier to ignore than confront. I told him everything, the slap, the excuses, the applause when she was arrested, the parents who had stayed silent for years out of fear, and the community that changed overnight when someone finally stood up. And then I asked the question I had written in the margins of my statement the night before. If a playground isn't safe, then what is? That's when something happened I didn't expect. A senator from Minnesota interrupted the proceedings, not rudely, but with emotion thick in his voice. "My niece has autism," he said. "She stopped going to parks after being screamed at by a woman who didn't understand why she didn't talk back. My sister didn't press charges. She didn't want the attention." He looked at me. "You're right. This isn't about swings. It's about power, who thinks they have it, and who pays the price when they abuse it." There was silence, the good kind. Suddenly, I wasn't just testifying, we were talking. One by one, the committee members began opening up, personal stories, community complaints, policy blind spots. They weren't arguing, they were listening. The chairman leaned forward. "What would you recommend?" he asked. I took a breath. "Mandatory behavioral signage in all public parks, real-time security feeds, accessible by parents, streamlined procedures for incident reporting, but more than anything, a shift in how we define public safety." I paused, my voice steady but firm. "It's not just about crime, it's about dignity, protecting our children's right to joy, without fear of being shamed, pushed, or silenced." When the session ended, I didn't feel like I'd won anything. I felt like I'd ignited something. The next morning I woke up to emails from 3 city councils asking for input on park safety reforms. A national parenting coalition reached out asking if I'd be open to sharing my story in their fall conference. And a message from someone unexpected. The officer who arrested Karen, "Sir," he wrote, "I've been on the force 14 years. I've arrested dealers, burglars, and worse. But that day at the park, that was different. I watched a kid stand up taller because his dad never flinched. Thought you should know. I read that message 3 times. Then I looked outside and saw Caleb in the yard. He was on the rope swing we tied to the big oak tree, spinning slowly, laughing. He saw me in the window and waved. No fear, no shame, just a kid being a kid again. And in that moment, I realized we didn't just defend a child, we defended the idea that children deserve joy without permission. That safety isn't a luxury, it's a right. From the wood chips under a swing to the marble floors of Congress, the message was the same. Enough is enough. If you believe a single act of courage can ripple all the way to the highest halls of power, hit that like button, drop your thoughts in the comments, and subscribe for more stories where ordinary people draw the line and move mountains. Next up, final chapter, the courtroom reckoning, when justice speaks loudest. Because sometimes the last word belongs to the law. A single push. That's all it took. Not the literal one, not the slap, not the swing, not even the courtroom gavel, but the push inside me, the one that said, "Not this time." It's been 3 months since that afternoon at the park. Karen. She completed the first 100 hours of community service, scrubbing graffiti off public buildings. Poetic in a way. She avoids the neighborhood now, no surprise there, but this story was never about her. It's about what happened after, about a swing that doesn't flinch anymore, about a boy who learned that he was worth protecting, and a father who learned that sometimes the most powerful thing you can do is stay calm and stand firm. Caleb and I go back to that park every weekend now, not because we have to, but because we can. The new benches have plaques, names of donors, including one that quietly reads, "In honor of every child who deserves to play without fear." Parents nod when they see me. Kids wave at Caleb. One little girl ran up last week and whispered, "You're the boy from the video who made the mean lady go away." He blushed. I laughed. And for the first time, I believed it. We'd rewritten the story, not just for us, but for every parent who ever stayed silent, for every child who thought they had to take it. Because sometimes justice doesn't roar. Sometimes it's a quiet swing, swaying in the wind. A boy laughing again. A father watching the sky, knowing he didn't just win a case, he changed the world his son will grow up in. If this story moved you, don't scroll away. Hit that like button, leave a comment below about a moment you stood your ground, and subscribe to this channel for more true stories about justice, courage, and the people who won't stay silent. This was The World After a Push. Thanks for watching, and remember, sometimes the smallest act changes everything.